Today I am here with an original tag video. This is called the Garden Book Tag. Number one is of course a Rambler rose. This is my favorite kind of rose. This is the rose that I first fell in love with. It is at least 19 years old because that's how long I've been living in this house, and I remember seeing it my whole life. When I was about 15, I kind of adopted it and started to take care of it, prune it, give it trellises. So the description for the Rambler Rose is a long read with multiple main characters and plot lines. It twists, turns, and puts on a show with language. For this one, I have chosen the book that introduced me to Latin American literature, and this is Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. This is one of two editions I own. This is a library discard. My grandparents got me a modern paperback for Christmas a couple years ago, and it was that paperback that I first read, and I loved it. I love the style, I love the magical realism. I love Marquez, and from that book I've read a great deal of what he's published. Number two is the Hybrid Tea Rose. This is a modern and long-lasting rose, and so a collection of memorable 20th or 21st century poetry or short stories that stay with you a long time. I'm a little sad because the two hybrid tea roses that I had in my garden died over the winter. They didn't come back to life this spring, and I pulled them out of the garden and planted some beans there, so that makes up for it in a way. But I picked Alice Munro's Who Do You Think You Are? This is a collection of short stories that I first read 3 springs ago, and they're published in the 20th century, but they've stuck with me. And here is the story Half a Grapefruit, which I believe I shared in my video when I filmed the Badass Short Story 101 tag, and that is one of my favorite short stories. But this collection has really resonated with me. I think about the stories often. Number 3 is Lilacs, and this is a seasonally inspired work that you look forward to reading at a specific time every year. Lilacs only bloom for about a week or two. In Ontario, they bloom in May, and after that, they're done, and you have to wait until the next year to smell that sweet fragrance to see those beautiful flowers again. For this one, I chose A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens because this is a book that I have read the last 2 Christmases. I intend to read it Christmas Eve this year. Coming up again. It's a short work, you can get through it in an hour or so, but I'm kind of making it a tradition, and I do look forward to reading it. Question 4 is Bleeding Heart, a beautiful dark work that broke your heart. For this one, I chose a work in translation. This is a French-Canadian novel by Jocelyn Saussure, 21 Cardinals, translated by Rhonda Mullins. I believe I reviewed this on my channel a year or so ago, but beautiful novel. It made me cry when I read it. A family with 21 children. Unfortunately, one of the children has been missing for years, and the others who have scattered across Canada, across the world, they're trying to hide the fact that one of their siblings is missing from their mother. And the story kind of unravels, and you find out why the sibling is missing and what exactly happened years ago when the family split up from their impoverished hometown. Number 5 is Queen Anne's Lace. This is a work that sometimes is seen as a weed, but you see it for what it really is, great literature. So I had to think back to what I read in my teenage years. I read a lot of popular literature, a lot of older popular literature in my teen years. And I thought of A Whale Boat by Kenneth Dodson. So this would have been a popular novel in its time, not really seen as literary, but I enjoyed it so much when I was 15 that I read it twice. It's a great, kind of an epic war novel, World War II novel. But to me, it's always been much more than a popular novel. I would always associate it with the other literature that I was reading at the time. I think I read it before I read Northwest Passage and after I read Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. So it was sandwiched right in there with literature, and I've always seen it as literature, although most people would say it's just a beat-up old popular novel that no one cares about anymore. Question 6. Forget-me-nots. An early bloomer, a work that you read early in life and will never forget. For this one, I chose not a novel, but a non-fiction work. And this is Costume and Fashion, 1760 to 1920 by Case and Scott. No dust jacket. I've got yellow paint on the cover from my grade 8 art class. But I picked this up at a used book sale, and I was drawn to it by the beautiful depictions of period clothing in it. And I was greatly fascinated by it. I would flip through it, just examining the pictures. I don't think I actually read the text of the book that comes later on. But whenever I think of period costume, I think of this book with its glossy pages. And one year I decided that I think I was 13. It was the last year I did Halloween. I wanted to dress up for school. I decided that I wanted to be her. And of course I failed miserably with my thrift store fixings, and everyone thought I was dressed up as a princess. And then, where is it at? There's another dress in here that I used for an art project. We had to create a paper mache figure in my art class, and I decided I wanted her to be wearing one of the dresses from this book, and for the life of me I can't remember which one it was, but I'm sure I must have marked it. I think it was this one. I tried to recreate this one, and of course it looked absolutely nothing like it. And the woman was way too tall, her breasts were way too large, she had an impossibly tiny waist, and her face was disfigured. That went in the garbage as soon as I had my mark. Number 7, Pansies. This is a classic that's losing popularity. Once upon a time, everyone had them in their gardens, and now they've traded them out for begonias or something of the sort. I chose The Empty Canvas by Alberto Moravia. I consider this a classic. Italian author, wrote in the 20th century, and I discovered him myself last summer. And from what people have told me, he was once quite a popular author. People once knew a lot about him, people read him. Now, when I mention his name, nobody knows who I'm talking about. And it was quite a search to find this copy of The Empty Canvas. I'm glad it came in an almost perfect condition dust jacket. This particular novel is about an artist who is kind of disenchanted with life, and he decides that he no longer wants to be an artist, and there's no longer anything in life that he finds enjoyable. But then he becomes obsessed with the former mistress of a neighbor who has died, and it's actually one of my favorite novels. Number 8, Trillium, a flower that comes in white or red. A flower that is grown through a large part of North America, but once you pick it, you basically kill it. It's actually illegal in many places to pick trilliums, especially in Ontario, where trillium is the provincial flower, and you can get fined for picking one. So trillium, native to North America in some provinces and states, it's illegal to pick them. This is a banned or challenged book. I settled on Margaret Lawrence's A Jest of God. This is about a school teacher in a small town. She has her first lover, has sex outside of marriage, and ends up pregnant. And the man ends up leaving her. He didn't care for her at all. And she deals with this emotional turmoil, this sexual awakening, what it's like to be kind of a forgotten woman in a forgotten town. And obviously it was challenged for the reason that a school teacher was having sex outside of marriage, and the book was being taught in schools. A specific teacher thought it portrayed teachers themselves in a bad way and thought that students would no longer respect teachers if they read this, and attempted to have it banned in a school. Orchid, a work that was as challenging to read as orchids are to grow and maintain. I've seen orchids in the grocery store. I've never attempted to buy one because they look too delicate, and I've heard terrible things about their lifespan. For this one, I've picked Roberto Bolaño's 2666. This was impossible for me to get through, and I mean impossible because this is where I stopped. Last August on page 482, the rape and murder that was ongoing got too much for me, and I was bored. I wanted to get more to the plot, to the story. You can only read about so many rapes and murders consecutively, and I ended up giving up on this one. Definitely a challenge to read, and a challenge that I was not up to, and although I enjoyed it at first, as I read on, I began to enjoy it less. And I didn't feel motivated to finish it, so I left it as is, but I left it on my shelf with my makeshift envelope bookmark in here, just on the odd chance that I decide to finish it someday. Question 10. Fern, a book that sparked your initial interest in a topic and spawned a TBR list of other books based on that topic. For this one, I've selected Trudeau Transformed, The Shaping of a Statesman, 1944 to 1965, by Max and Monique Nemnen and translated by George Toombs. And this is a book that I read in my last year of high school. It is part of a set of biographies on former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, father of current Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And when I read this book, along with the earlier biography in this series, I became quite interested in Trudeau. I started reading some of his own writings. He wrote a memoir of sorts with a friend of his about traveling in communist China in the 1950s or 40s. I think the 1950s. I read a collection of essays that he wrote, and I read a number of other biographies about him. In particular, the biography written about him by famous Canadian biographer John English. And this book kind of sparked my interest in not only Pierre Trudeau, but in Canadian politicians in general, and it furthered my interest in Canadian politics as a whole. I have a bonus question here. What is your favorite flower? This is an easy answer for me. My favorite flower is the rose. I talk about roses. I post pictures of roses on Twitter. I grow roses. My middle name is Rose. There's no reason for me not to love roses. So here's the fun part where I get to tag people. I had a lot of people on Twitter last night saying that sounds like a great idea. Yes, please do this. So I'm going to tag them. First off, Peter Clark, the writer, who tells me that he was about to create his own garden book tag until he saw that I had created one. And he said he was going to tag Johnny Keene, so I'll start by tagging Peter Clark, the writer, and Johnny Keene. Then I'm also going to tag Erica from The Perks of Books, Rebel Reads, Strip Cover Lit, of course, Craving Books, The Rejected Manuscript, The Restricted Section, The Drunken Library, the Page Turner, who is a new booktuber to me. I think you should go check out her channel. She and I are currently doing a buddy read of my favorite novel, Two Solitudes. Austin Kay, Rachel Louise Atkins, and yeah, I'm going to leave it at 12. I think that's 12. So I'm looking forward to see what you all come up with. And that's all for today. So I'm going to go read some books, take some pictures of my roses, obsess, and so on and so forth.